All right. Welcome, everyone. We're here to discuss the future of video codecs. We have a really great panel today, and I'm really excited to moderate the discussion. I was asked to do this yesterday, super excited to be here. And I really hope this is going to be informative for everyone. We'll save some time at the end for questions. Also, feel free to come up. I think we have until about 4:15. So I'm going to start with some introductions. We'll spend a few minutes on an overview and history of video codecs. And we'll talk about H.264. We'll talk about HEVC, VP9, AV1, all the cool new stuff that's coming out. My name is Igor Oreper, and I lead the solutions team for Bitmovin. And Bitmovin, we're an API-first company. We're cloud native, and really our goal is to help developers solve really complex video problems. So starting with some introductions. Sung, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Choi. I'm the co-founder of Fubo TV. Fubo TV is a sports-first virtual MVPD. We help cord cutters get their live sports and also their entertainment content without having to have a cable subscription. And previous to Fubo TV, the company's been around for right around 5 years or so. And there's a bunch of people from our company. We've been around for 5 years or so, and previous to that, I was a product manager at Drama Fever, which was acquired to SoftBank, is now part of the Warner Brothers. And I've been working with video for about 8 years or so. And the rest of the panelists have much better intros, so we'll go to Glenn afterwards.
No, it's all the same. Glenn Goldstein. I'm with Viacom. I've been working across various parts of Viacom for many years, starting out with MTV. I came into Viacom previously from a digital imaging background, but digital imaging and video, obviously, an awful lot of similarities as far as dealing with compression techniques, media management, et cetera. You can go ahead, Tom. So the next slide, just so I can see. Yeah, so we're here today to talk about the future of video codecs. I thought I'd just talk a little bit about the history of video codecs, at least as what we do, at Viacom. And so these discussions about Codec A versus Codec B, this is nothing new. And I was sort of reminiscing a bit, circa 2000, which is right around when I started with MTV.com. It was a lively debate between Windows Media 7, Real Video G2, if you remember that. H.263 was an awfully big deal. And we did an awful lot of stuff in Windows Media and Real Media in the time, and I'll play that Duran clip for you in a minute. Early 2000s, it was a little bit of everything, Real, Windows, and QuickTime. But back then, and this is something I think that it's important to note, is the codec was directly associated with the player and platform. If you were on Windows machines, it was Windows Media. Real Media played there as well. They were a little bit of an exception. If you were on a Mac, it was QuickTime, right? And it was all very much siloed up. And not really until Flash did you really start to see widespread view of it being a little bit independent. But even with VP6, now you've got Flash Player and VP6, but you weren't really going to use VP6 in that many other places than Flash Player. But luckily back then, Flash Player was in most places you needed to be, which was web browsers, right? That was pretty much about it. This is just an example here. I'll go into the next slide, and then we'll sort of go back. It all changed, and I found this last night poking around. I remember when this headline came out, Flash supports H.264. That got us to this H.264 everywhere world, where I think we've happily been for an awful long time, and that is about to change. And I think that's sort of the topic for today's discussion is H.264 everywhere all the time. It's just not going to be like that anymore. It was very convenient for us. We got a lot of efficiencies out of it. But before H.264, like I said, it was this world of dealing with things like 28 dial-ups, et cetera. So I thought maybe we'd just put this video on there, and you can listen to all its wonderful glory. Let's see how this thing plays.
And although excess and misfortune would eventually drive them apart, they began their musical journey as a
Sounds like it's underwater.
You can count the blocks.
Yeah. That actually, so that's 20, it's 15 kilobit video and 8 kilobit audio. So designed to play quite nicely in a 28.8 modem. And it was about 10 frames per second. So that's where we were. Let's never go back there again, and let's move forward.
Awesome. Thanks, Glenn. John.
Hi, I'm John Luther. I'm SVP of Technology at JW Player, also a longtime veteran of the codec wars. I also remember the day, so I worked at Onto Technologies, which was a video codec company that developed, let's see, if anyone remembers Og Theora, that was a company from Onto, a codec from Onto called VP3. We then developed VP6 for Flash, and I also remember the day that headline came out. That was the thing that we had feared for a long time, that we would, we all went out and got drunk. No lie, we closed the office and went to a bar and all got drunk. Because we knew, like, that's it for VP6. I mean, we still licensed it, but we had other things in the works, and then eventually in 2010 we got acquired by Google. VP8 became the basis for WebM. Later came VP9, then VP10, which then morphed into AV1. So I've been in this business for a long time. I've seen a lot, have a lot of opinions about it, which I'm sure I'll express soon. Right now I'm at JW Player, basically running the whole, engineering technology initiatives, more kind of forward-looking stuff for the company.
Thanks, John.
Yep.
Hey everyone, my name is Andrew Grathwohl and I'm the Director of Media Technology for Littlstar. We're a premium content delivery platform for virtual reality and augmented reality, and so my understanding of this realm kind of comes from the VR and AR space. I've had about 10 years of experience in the immersive media platform. I've been working at Littlstar for about 3 years in my current capacity. But before that, I was at Amazon and at CBS, where I worked in a similar realm as I do today. I actually got started in this world as an audio engineer for film and television, a Foley artist, and then I quickly discovered how exciting and difficult video was, and so I grasped onto that too. Very excited to be here to talk about the next generation codecs.
Great. Thanks, everyone. So I wanted to do a really quick introduction to add to what Glenn and John have already said about the history of Codecs. So at Bitmovin, we ran a survey last year. We're going to do another one this summer. But these are some of the results from the survey. So we sent it out. We got 380 responses across 50 countries, and mostly a technical audience. And you can kind of see the breakdown here. And so we asked a couple of questions that I thought were interesting and relevant for this panel. One is, which video codecs are you using currently? And so a year ago, you can see that H264 AVC is really the video codec that is in use today. Definitely see quite a bit of use in HEVC, and then VP9, AV1 are pretty nascent.
I don't believe that 28% number. I think that's wishful thinking on people's part, I think.
Perhaps. So these are the results of the survey. And yeah, I'm excited to see the new survey. Definitely welcome everyone to participate
Should
this
ask
year.
how many people are using it out in production. Maybe that's percentage will change a little bit.
Yeah.
I've certainly used them. Our users just haven't seen them yet.
Yeah. And so we also said, hey, which codecs are you planning to use in the next 12 months? And we asked this a year ago, and a year ago the answers were these. So definitely uptick in HEVC, really uptick across the board, but a bigger uptick in HEVC compared to VP9 and AV1. So those are the results we got. And we also do quite a bit of R&D in this space, and so to kick off the discussion, I wanted to share a little bit from some of our recent findings as we were comparing AV1, for example, to VP9. And so what's interesting here when all you're doing is looking at just the PSNR values, and lots of healthy debate about whether PSNR is a good and objective measure of quality, but this is the measure we use. A lot of others use this measure as well. And really we're measuring the peak signal to noise ratio to figure out in an objective way how viewers are perceiving the quality of the video. And so what we saw for the same video encoded in AV1 versus VP9 is overall about a 13% improvement in quality with AV1. But you see, it's interesting, the quality improvement is actually higher for the higher bit rates. So things like 4K, HDR is a little bit higher. And we also did the same comparison for HEVC. And for HEVC, it's even higher. So 17% if you average it out across the entire bit rate stack, or 44% for those really high bit rate videos. So, I wanted to kind of prime the discussion a little bit here and move on to questions. So first question to the panelists. Do you foresee any of these up-and-coming codecs becoming a successor to what is now really the incumbent in the market, H.264? Sung, you want to?
Yeah, I can start. I think the AV1, at least recently, has been getting the most amount of momentum. And HEVC, I think, has been going on for a while. And at least from our perspective, we're looking for production use for a wide number of channels we need to encode and wide number of videos we need to encode. So I think, AV1 or HEVC sounds like in the near term, we're going to have to support them both because of the player support. I don't know if others have different opinions about whether to only use one or the other, but I'd love to have a world where we're just using one format, back to the H.264 world. And from cost perspective, it starts to become cost prohibitive for us to have H.264, HEVC, and AV1 or VP9 all at the same time. So we're definitely on the sidelines a little bit in exploring the codec wars. And veterans might have a different take on this.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to probably stay in our little H.264 everywhere cocoon as long as we can. But there will be things that will pull us out of there. 4K and HDR, ultimately that will be the thing. As we start moving forward with 4K and HDR, we're not going to do that H.264. I think that's pretty much a done deal. And I suspect what we'll do is, depending on the platforms that we're targeting for 4K HDR, we'll go with the recommendation on that platform. I think as of right now, that's likely to be HEVC, but that could really change. I mean, if we're looking at for us, the platforms we would target for that type of distribution are probably going to be Roku and the Apple TV, those types of devices. That would probably steer us towards HEVC. I mean, VP9, I think, I'm assuming it will die, AV1 will be the replacement. So VP9 almost shouldn't be discussed the same way as these. It will die, AV1 will replace it. But I think VP9 near term, it was very useful if you've got a large audience on Android and you want to optimize for that or optimize for Chrome. I think it makes a lot of sense. I don't know that we would go there. I think we're going to be focused on 4K being the thing that pulls us into this.
Thanks, Glenn. John?
Yeah. I mean, in my experience, these things, everybody wants them to happen fast, but they never do. This takes a long time. I remember when 264, when the bitstream was published and frozen in 2003, I mean, it's going to be around for a while, like as Glenn said. I mean, it just, quality arguments aside, it just makes the most sense because it plays literally everywhere. And that took a very long time to get all the hardware in place for that and the workflows for production and everything that needs to happen. And I think to, play devil's advocate against AV1 a little bit, I do think it will succeed. But the amount of stuff that needs to be in place in a modern video production workflow and delivery environment, it's massive. There's a whole tool chaining thing that needs to happen. The performance of the encoder is still abysmal. These things, it's going to have to be optimized. So anyway, I think to answer your question, I also have learned never to predict which one is going to win, because that is also, the way I look at it, if the whole result of AV1 is that HEVC ends up being royalty-free, then that's great. AV1 wins, in a sense, because that's the real goal. That was the whole goal of the WebM project from the beginning. It was to have a royalty-free, high-quality codec. It was never to beat H.264 or to do, it was to have a royalty. That was the mission of the project. I'm assuming that's the same, you know, AV1, AOM has the same mission, but
So that's
yeah, I think AV1 will be successful, but it's going to take a very long time. And the reason why is because Apple's involved.
Yep.
Honestly, if Apple had been involved in VP9, we'd be talking about a whole different world. Now, how much they're going to contribute, how much they're going to be involved, but it just the appearance and them sort of sanctioning it just changes the whole.
Yeah, that's
dynamic
huge.
of it. Yeah.
Andrew, what do you think?
Well, I will say I agree with everything that everyone's already said, but what I will add is that, especially at Littlstar, where I work today, there is a very active and growing number of content creators who are not institutionalized. They don't work in enterprise-y kind of environments, and I believe that we will see a codec war spawned out between people who are creating content at the higher levels and at the more hobbyist levels. I think that we're going to see a lot of like HEVC versus AV1 based on basically the kind of content being made. If you're a YouTuber, I can't imagine that you'll be making anything other than AV1, but you know, if you're working in broadcast or if you're making content for televisions, for gaming platforms, et cetera, you will likely want to stick with the standards bodies like MPEG. I believe they just started a new bitstream development called VVC, which is meant to actually combat AV1, so I don't believe that there will be a new reigning king anytime soon.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. And that's the beauty of being on the end. You have to come up with something extra creative. That's right. Thanks, Andrew.
Which you did. Yeah.
So Apple now supports HEVC in Mac High Sierra, Mac OS High Sierra, in iOS 11. Has that changed anything for you guys, or the way that you're thinking about you know, how you're moving ahead with implementation and adoption of these different codecs? Anyone?
Yeah, I mean, for us, we definitely look at the device penetration as the first thing to decide, are we going to invest our time into, you know, encoding videos differently? And I think Apple devices alone isn't enough, at least in our case. But, you know, it's definitely a contributing factor.
Yeah, I was mentioning earlier, you know, like spot optimizations like VP9 on Android. For us, we have an interesting spot optimization opportunity for HEVC. We have a Nickelodeon application where kids download videos and the video goes interactive. We'll call it play along video. And because we're downloading videos, it puts an awful lot of pressure on file size. The app just happens to be iOS only. We're not even doing Android, so it's sort of like the perfect storm of let's just aim for HEVC and do it. So that's likely to be our first HEVC use case, just to strictly to control file size, which will be, you know, over H.264 will be 30, 40%.
Of course. Any other comments?
Yeah, I mean, very similar at JW. I mean, later this year we'll start encoding into it. So far we haven't, because, you know, so much of what we do is the web and HTML5, and HEVC just hasn't been supported in those environments. Mm-hmm. And again, just because, you know, Apple devices, again, a lot of it's about workflow and costs and spinning up more encoders and all these things that 264, we're always optimizing those environments to make them more efficient as well. That's the other thing, is there's probably still a lot of life left in 264 for, you know, 1080p and below resolutions. So, yeah, well, it didn't, when it was announced, it was one of those things where everyone said, that's it, game over, HEVC wins, but it never works that way, in my experience.
Not until it's everywhere.
Right.
Like everything else, all is good in moderation, right? I mean, it seems like we're going to live more so in a multi-codec world than we do today, right? And I expect that maybe, you know, our developer report survey responses this year maybe they'll be a little more evened out, and we're not going to have H.264 all the way at the top. Andrew, anything to add?
Yeah, I think that the most exciting thing from my vantage point about Apple's adoption of HEVC is that we finally have a standardized codec that really takes advantage of those pretty screens that Apple devices have. You see 10-bit color and 422 color on these screens. I mean, it's quite phenomenal. It's significantly better. And so I think that this is going to give the consumer audience a considerably greater demand for high quality because HEVC is now being distributed over Apple products.
Cool. What about browser support for HEVC? So at this point, only Edge and Safari support HEVC decoding. Do you think that'll change? And do you think that'll change kind of your decision-making around implementing the HEVC codec?
No, for us, both those browsers are fairly minor penetration with our customer base.
Yeah, I agree. That's not going to move the needle for us at all.
Yeah.
Agree.
There you go.
I think Firefox and Chrome will both need to support at least bindings so that if you do have HEVC software, you could still leverage it within the browser, but ultimately it's probably not going to change much for at least like my company's workflow at all. No.
Yeah, look, and outside of Flash Player, native H.264 adoption in the video tag took a while as well, right? That was fragmented, as I recall.
right.
Firefox didn't touch it for a while.
They couldn't
Yeah.
make the license. Yeah, we tried to take it out of Chrome, but that kind of didn't work out.
Maybe we'll all be missing Flash Player a few years from now and wishing there was still something like that. I don't know.
Could be. I mean, for all of its problems, it was ubiquitous, and it did run in all the browsers. And-
Yep.
There is an open source effort right now to reintroduce RTMP and Flash Player into the current browsers. It's a pretty strong movement.
It's needed.
Yeah.
Some kind of real-time, oh, sorry, drifting from the,
Oh,
No,
low
that's
latency
okay.
live streaming, RTMP.
yeah.
So new rule, we're not allowed to talk about RTMP. What about the licensing situation? So John, you already touched on it a little bit for HEVC. I mean, right now it is a bit of a blocker, I think, for a lot of folks to really make use of it in a practical sense. Do you see that changing? And what's your general perspective on that?
Yeah, I mean, at least from our perspective, it does seem to be changing. I mean, you definitely have a lot more kind of history, but like HEVC standards bodies seem to be responding to AV1, which is a great news for us. And from our perspective, if it's a requirement, because we are a fairly expensive service that is not as widely distributed as, say, some other free video service, we would definitely consider a licensing approach, but it's not an option for everybody.
Yeah, I mean, I was really encouraged by HEVC Advanced, announcements. There won't be any title-by-title licensing. It's again, I've seen this movie before. The early days of H.264 with MPEG-LA, we were all spooked with the effectively the usage licensing, and all of that became moot, and it all focused on codec licensing, which is where it really should be. So, from the perspective of a content owner view, I think this is a really good move, and I think we'll start to see these barriers come down. And I think the HEVC AV1 discussion, let's have it on technical merits and other things, but I think, to me, I was just sensing a little bit too much sort of scare tactics out there of AV1, go AV1, avoid these, I think let's talk about it more in terms of technical merits.
Yeah, I agree 100%, and also, because you and I have the history here, this is exactly the same pattern. People forget there were actually 3 royalty pools for 264. The third one kind of died off very quickly, but then there were 2, and magically one day they became 1 because, and it's all shrouded in mystery. A lot of the MPEG licensing royalty stuff is HEVC Advance. It's almost like a gambling or a gambit. They open very high stakes. They have these outrageous royalties. Those of us in the more open community are all incensed and flip out about, how outrageous it is. And of course, these people are not stupid. We like to make them out that they are, but they're not. This is a tactic. They'll reduce it, get it to a point where everyone's comfortable enough with it, or at least, you know, can live with it, and that'll be where they end up. But again, that's part of the great thing about having something like AV1 to keep that pressure on them. If that pressure didn't exist, yeah, you would be paying HEVC Advanced $4 or whatever, some outrageous royalty.
Right, yeah.
That new development from HEVC Advance and from MPEG LA's recent clarification on content royalties is a big reason why we're starting to look towards productionalizing HEVC. It was, you know, it was a pretty difficult year for us because we really wanted to get it out there, and we in the VR space, it's so essential to have good support for high resolutions. And so, you know, we were doing everything we could but with testing this bitstream, and we're happy that we now have what looks like a way forward for implementation. But last year we weren't so certain.
So definitely sounds like you guys are into HEVC adoption, not clear exactly how fast and exactly for what types of content, but you know, it sounds like there's definitely a big place for it in the market. What about VP9? You know, Netflix is already using VP9 for mobile devices. Do you think VP9 is a viable alternative to H.264 and HEVC as well?
I say yes, definitely.
From our perspective, I mean, it's kind of a, I mean, Glenn did point out that, you know, AV1 is eventually probably going to dominate the VP9. So from our perspective, not having VP9 today, we would likely, you know, wait it out a little bit more and see where the AV1 goes. If we haven't made an investment already.
Yeah, I mean, like I said before, it's a spot optimization, and Netflix are the kings of spot optimization. Every single spot they'll optimize for, so, and they have to at the scale and the amount of bits they're pushing. So it completely makes sense to me that they would choose the most optimal codec for each and every device and platform they're on. Mm-hmm. For us, we're looking more economies of scale and trying to you know, economize as much as we can on storage. And, you know, we feel that, you know, to hit devices like Android, smart use of H.264 with constant rate factor and other techniques to keep the bit rate down, for us, that's good for now.
It works, yeah.
Yeah.
John?
Yeah, I mean, we do VP9 today. You know, again, historically, the VPX codecs on the encoding side, not so great. And I think when you're in an environment like Netflix or Google or YouTube where you know, have vast resources to do this, it's like, and I know because I was in that bubble, it's like, well, what's the big deal? Just spin up a few more encoders. Yeah. But when you get out, and now, you know, having been at JW for a while and seeing what most real-world publishers have to deal with, and us running our own transcoding farm, and those costs are real. Like it, you know, it's not trivial.
Yeah, and the
to encode
multipliers
VP9.
based on user size are different, right? You know, Netflix's audience on Android or on devices capable of handling VP9 well are so big that you multiply that by the 20% whatever efficiency improvement. It's big bandwidth dollars, so it totally makes sense for them.
I would also add that VP9 is able to be contained inside of an MP4, which is an exciting development for us because what it means is that we can use not just, you know, multi-codec dashing with all the same container and timecode and all that stuff. We also can go to different platforms with one manifest, which is very exciting for us. So we're big and hot on the VP9.
You do VP9 and HLS or no?
MPEG dash.
Dash, yeah.
Well, that was Netflix. They wrote the spec for putting VP9 in MP4. There was a document that they had published about, look, you know, this is how you put it in an MP4, the Troska, all this stuff. We're not going to do it.
Yeah, that's precisely. I am pretty sure it was Netflix who developed it, although we didn't take advantage of it until the FFmpeg project added it as a feature.
Okay.
Yeah.
So specific to mobile devices, it seems like you know, HEVC is popular for iOS devices, right? We've got support from Apple there, and Android seems to be more favorable for AV1 and VP9. Do you see for mobile devices specifically any of those formats sort of gaining more adoption faster?
I am not able to really make a comment on that. I think on the Android devices in particular, I think H.264 is still going to dominate while the whole, you know, AV1 and VP9 settlement goes through. And on the iOS side, I do see that, HEVC taking a major role. And we'll see what Apple does with their AV1 implementation, which is potentially coming down the line, which may change the equation there.
Yeah, I think that's how I'm looking at it as well. I want to wait and see what Apple does on the iOS, yeah.
Same, John.
Yeah, I mean, that's the other, there's HEVC hardware in almost every Android device in the world. It's there. It's just difficult to access it. So if Google made it a bit easier, which I don't see them doing that, but that would certainly help to be able to access the HEVC hardware in Android devices. But yeah, I think for now it's pretty much Apple. Sounded like a symbol. Yeah, that was a punchline. That was my.
I'll echo all the other comments about this topic, and I will say it's very important that we watch what Apple does because HEVC is, I think we're still 2 or 3 years away from actually seeing how that's going to work out in the consumer space. But what I do know is that a lot of Android devices say they have HEVC support, and that actual playback capability leaves something to be desired on a lot of Androids. And so I think we're going to have to see to what extent Androids are going to make the HEVC adoption process easier. I don't think we can say for certain yet.
Great, thank you. And so we talked about HEVC, we talked about VP9. What about AV1, just looking into the future? And John, you talked a little already about, there's some very practical sort of obstacles to adopting AV1 today. But, looking ahead, more than just AV1 kind of putting pressure onto the HEVC, the patent pools and licensing. I mean, what do you think is required in order for AV1 to really gain adoption? Anyone?
Yeah, do you want me to?
Well, go ahead.
I mean, there's definitely, I guess, the tipping point for H.264 was probably the flash that you guys talked about.
Yep.
I think maybe that moment is, when Apple decides to adopt, AV1 and decides that they're going to go full speed with it. I think a bunch of us are still waiting for the moment, and even when that moment happens, from our perspective, if we still have to support H.264, AV1 is an additional cost factor, especially on the encoding side.
Yeah, you're going to need decode hardware everywhere, particularly in the mobile devices where you don't want to be killing the batteries. And there's sort of another angle here we haven't talked about much at all, really, is the consumer electronics devices and like the cameras.
Yep.
I remember first seeing a GoPro put out H.264. I was like, oh my God, it's saving the exact same file format that I can play, in a video tag. That was a pretty big deal. And, I don't know where we are with seeing devices like GoPro putting out AV1 or these sort of formats.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I expect they're pretty well entrenched in the H.264 world, at least for a little while.
Yeah, it takes, as I said, it takes a very long time. And the other critical thing I think that helped H.264 in the web world was the X.264 project, like having a really solid open source implementation on the encoding side that helped tremendously. And so I guess that's the thing that, the one thing I learned through the whole journey was that you can't just, being free is not enough. It's really not. It's like, well, it's free, so obviously that is just absolutely not true. It has to be better.
Yep.
If it's free and better, then yeah, then you got something. And even then, it's still hard. MPEG is very formidable. They've been doing this a long time. They have brilliant people working on this stuff, as do the AOM people. But if it's not better, if you have better quality, but it takes 5 days to encode a 30-minute file, that's just not better. It's just not. And it can be free all day, but if the other costs that you have to incur to do it, it's just not going to.
It's not worth it.
Yeah. So as I said, it's just going to take a long time. To Glenn's point, all the hardware, all these things have to be in place for it to really be used, other than for somebody encoding a few files to put on their website, which doesn't even happen anymore anyway. People upload them to YouTube or other services, Vimeo, ours, and that's where it has to make sense economically in a cloud environment.
There is, I think, one aspect of the AOM and of AV1 that's a bit unprecedented, which is that it's the consortium of several efforts of several companies, major players also in the video space. And the way that AV1 came about was that it had to merge a lot of different innovations from a lot of different technologies. And I think that that's going to be something that might encumber initial adoption. And it's also going to make it difficult, I think, to make it an efficient codec, especially on the encode side. So I think that we're going to need to see how the AOM operates, and if they can meet all of their specified goals, and if they can truly succeed in a way that only the MPEG group has been able to be. Because you said it before, it can't just be free, it has to also be organized, you know, and that's the thing that the MPEG group has above everyone else. If AV1 and AOM, though, can reach and match that level of sophistication in the rollout, I really do think that AV1 adoption could be significantly faster. But I'm still seeing like 3 or 4 or 5 years out before we see any kind of like consumer level main adoption of AV1.
I'm personally optimistic about the encoding and sort of processing side of it, right? So to your point, even if it's free, well, you're still having to spend so much on compute just to process video. You know, good news is that's coming down year over year, and I think it'll continue, but certainly it's not anywhere near where we are with HEVC, VP9, really any of the other codecs. And we haven't really talked about connected devices. You know, certainly we talked about hardware decoding requirements, and you know, we always focus on mobile devices, on browsers and desktop experiences, but more and more people are using connected devices, you know, smart TVs as well as the Rokus and Chromecasts and others. Do you think it's realistic for those connected devices, especially smart TVs? I'm thinking, you know, Samsung, Tizen, right? I mean, there's some sort of, you know, they're underpowered. They're not really able to decode. The hardware is just not there. Do you think those manufacturers are going to kind of step up the hardware game?
Yeah, and maybe other folks have worked on the television devices, but it does seem like the AV1 is definitely behind on that race. I think at least on the higher end television devices, HEVC support seems to be the norm. And you know, certainly the lower end smart TVs, we wouldn't even try to play back advanced codecs. I think we're going to stick with H.264 for people that have the same TVs for 10 years. But you know, from where we're looking at it is like for this connected TV devices, and if you're, like Glenn was saying, spot optimizing, I think HEVC is likely a better solution. And we haven't seen anything around AV1 or, you know, even BP9.
Yeah, I think it's likely that they're all going to choose one or the other, probably not do both. Mm-hmm. And I actually think Netflix is going to bring a fair amount of power to bear on manufacturers. Like, if you want the Netflix app on your device, mm-hmm. this is what you're going to have to do. And you know, I was in Netflix's thing yesterday where they demonstrated the device that they clamp on top of the front of the TV. They're measuring frame rate, and they're giving all sorts of feedback to hardware manufacturers to let them know if their device is effectively ready enough for Netflix. And so
yeah.
I love it. I love it. You know?
Yeah, that's a really good point. Anything else, John, Andrew? Okay.
Well, I would say, you know, there are new developers and people entering the space of set-top boxes and such. NVIDIA makes a very high-powered set-top device that rivals all of the other ones, actually far exceeds performance of like the Roku, of the Fire TV, of the Apple TV. And so I do believe that there is a potential for a stronger kind of participant in this industry of consumer devices that could actually take people by surprise. I'm not ruling out the possibility that NVIDIA becomes a very strong competitor in this space eventually.
Okay. Any other trends that you guys think are sort of viable, practical alternatives to maybe migrating codecs, you know, to do things like save on compression? I think you guys mentioned a couple already, but you know, any that come to mind, per title encoding, you know, sort of content aware encoding, other techniques that are sort of codec agnostic?
Yeah, I think all these things, content aware, scene adaptive, basically anything that's getting you in the direction of VBR. I think everybody was so focused on constant bitrate encoding for so long, which was like the worst possible thing you could be doing for quality, all to make sure that the adaptive streaming algorithm had the convenience of a nice, predictable bit stream. It was just awful. And I think you're now starting to see a shift towards buffer-based adaptive bitrate algorithms versus bandwidth-based. And so I think to the extent that we can encourage variable bitrate techniques, when the scene goes quiet, let the bottom drop out. When the scene goes noisy, jack it up. Those techniques work very well in H.264. And we're getting a lot of efficiency out of that type of thing.
Great.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there's Beamer and ZPEG, and there's these technologies. Idiom is another company that's, I guess, essentially they're preprocessors to some extent. But yeah, just taking more advantage of the amount of data that you have every second in a 264-bit stream is long overdue. I mean, yeah, to Glenn's point, for a long time it was just like throttle, just jam it up to 2 megabits and keep it there, even when there's a black screen. It's just.
What's the point?
That's again to my earlier point. I think 264 has a lot of life still left in it. Not obviously for 4K HDR, these things, but again, those things are going to take a very long time. Most people today have devices capable of 4K, but there's just no content out there.
Yep.
A lot of people don't even realize that most of the time they're watching 720p on an actual television over cable. So. Yeah, we can get more out of the technologies that we already have with the widespread decoding support that you absolutely have to have.
Yeah, some things that I've been looking at are ways to optimize cost, and I think with a lot of the better container orchestration that has been happening in the industry, you're able to better kind of utilize leftover compute, whether it's within your application clusters that you're already running, or you're going after some leftover data center CPUs. And I think those things are interesting, leveraging spot instances, potentially, doing a partnership with CDNs that have free CPUs during off-peak hours. I think those opportunities are going to kind of help us get to a place where we can have a more, optimal encoding for cheaper compute for, potentially leveraging multiple codecs.
Yeah. So it sounds like lots more options than maybe we've had in the past, and I think that's good. It's positive, right? We have more control over how we're streaming video, what type of content, which codecs we're using, and other techniques as well. I think all positive steps, and we're definitely in a multi-codec world. I wanted to open it up for maybe a couple of questions from the audience. We have just a handful of minutes left. 2 minutes left. All right. So first question gets it.
And it sounds like you kind of ended it on the note that you said. It sounds like from the top, we really have to continue to encode to multiple codecs and formats, at least for a while. We really just have to wait on time.
Or choose H.264.
Yeah, or start to do multiples if you had been sitting there at H.264, yeah.
Continue to use H.264, plan on using H.265, AV1 is available, and tools, and then also use VP9. And it sounds like you're going to at least have 2 formats. Does that sound?
Yeah, once you're into 4K, you're sort of, it's over. I mean, you're going to have to move up into HEVC or VP9 or one of these, or AV1.
Yeah, I mean, if I were to summarize it, right, we have H.264 now. It covers everything, but not in the best and most efficient way. So as you expand your use cases to 4K, HDR, the different types of new content, VR, you have to use new codecs, and you have to use new techniques to compress the video better, to minimize the amount of bandwidth that you're having to consume in order to deliver that video. And so it seems like a very gradual, incremental improvement and optimization over time.
A long time, years.
A long time.
I can't emphasize that enough. You're going to be doing multiple codecs.
Yeah, as long as we have to support at least H.264 and there's no other codec with that ubiquity, we're going to have to continue to do these small optimizations, I think. But I'd love to get into a world where we no longer have to do H.264, move on to a better codec, then that's when we will go full throttle with the new codec.
So maybe for a while we're going to go this way, but maybe come back this way in the far future. Okay, well, thank you everyone for coming and participating. We'll be around for a few minutes if you guys have follow-up questions. Thank you.